The rack was never meant to kill quickly. It was engineered with a darker purpose, to stretch a human being to the edge of endurance, keeping them alive as their body unraveled joint by joint. Death would have been merciful. Instead, the rack was built to ensure survival, at least long enough for screams, confessions, or accusations to spill out. The device itself was deceptively simple, a rectangular wooden frame, large enough to hold a grown man, dominated by two rollers, one fixed at the head, the other turned by a crank near the feet. Heavy ropes bound wrists and ankles to these rollers, so that each turn tightened the body, dragging limbs in opposite directions. With every rotation, tendons stretched, muscles tore, and cartilage ground against bone. Yet, unlike executioner's blades or gallows, the rack did not seek to end life. It sought to preserve it, to prolong the agony so that the victim's breaking point was measured not in minutes but in hours. Torturers knew precisely how to work the mechanism. A skilled hand could tighten the ropes just enough to wrench a shoulder from its socket while keeping the victim conscious. Another twist might dislocate hips, tearing ligaments in an explosion of pain, yet still fall short of stopping the heart. The genius of the rack, if cruelty can be called genius, was that it made the human body betray itself slowly. The more it stretched, the more it screamed, the more its own endurance became its torment. Contemporaries recorded that victims sometimes grew inches taller as joints were ripped apart. But this grotesque elongation was not a marvel, it was mutilation. The body became alien, reshaped into something grotesque, while the victim remained trapped inside, fully aware of the disfigurement. Many begged not for death, but simply for their tormentors to stop turning the wheel. Yet that was the rack's true horror. It balanced on the edge of survivability, ensuring that pleas lasted long enough to be useful to those in power. Unlike battlefield wounds, which might bring either swift death or the hope of healing, the rack produced lingering ruin. Survivors, when they existed, carried bodies that no longer obeyed them. Arms hung limp, sockets permanently damaged. Legs gave way beneath them, twisted and weak. Even when bones did not break outright, the tearing of soft tissue meant years of agony, if not permanent disability. Thus, the rack destroyed not only in the moment but in the future, leaving its victims shells of themselves, reminders to society of what defiance cost. Yet, what made the rack so chilling was not only the physical torment, but the methodical restraint behind it. This was not random cruelty, but calibrated suffering. Authorities did not want martyrs who died defiantly in silence. They wanted confessions, names, compliance. The rack allowed them to hold life hostage, tightening and loosening the ropes in rhythm with questions. It was an interrogation as much as an ordeal. Its rhythm dictated not by the screams alone, but by the answers wrung from those screams. Historical records show that even hardened men, soldiers, rebels, zealots, crumbled beneath its design. Strong wills snapped as surely as tendons. For every execution avoided, there was a ruined body paraded before the public, living proof that resistance led not to glorious death, but to degradation. The rack reduced courage to ash, not with a sword's fatal stroke, but with a slow-motion destruction that demanded endurance no human could sustain. And so, the rack must be understood not as a killing machine, but as an invention of deliberate restraint. It inflicted the maximum agony precisely because it delayed the release of death. It thrived in the interval between life and the grave, stretching not only bodies but time itself. That pause, agonizing, endless, unrelenting, was its true cruelty. The rack was not only a device of pain in the moment, it was an instrument of permanent ruin. Unlike the gallows or the executioner's axe, its purpose was not to extinguish life with finality, but to dismantle it piece by piece. Every turn of the wheel pulled bones apart, shredded muscles, and tore ligaments, leaving bodies that could never be whole again. To understand the rack is to recognize that its cruelty extended beyond the dungeon walls, following victims long after the ropes were untied. When a prisoner was stretched, the process began slowly, deceptively, with only a tightening of ropes. But each twist of the crank forced the body into unnatural positions. Shoulders slipped from their sockets with a sickening pop, arms wrenched upward until cartilage snapped, hips tore loose, knees buckled backward, ankles twisted into grotesque shapes. Torturers were trained to listen for the cracks, to feel the resistance in the ropes give way as a joint dislocated. They did not aim for immediate destruction, but for controlled injury, one joint after another. Accounts from survivors, rare as they are, describe the sensation as waves of fire coursing through the body, a pain that began in one limb and spread like lightning. The tearing of ligaments, once complete, meant the victim could no longer control that limb. Yet the nerves remained alive, screaming. Imagine trying to move an arm no longer anchored in its socket, the bone floating in flesh like driftwood in water. The rack created bodies both alive and broken, puppets whose strings had been cut, and this destruction was not fleeting. Once torn, a ligament does not mend itself. Dislocated joints, if not reset quickly, become permanently weakened. Victims who survived left the chamber unable to walk, their shoulders slumped unnaturally, their hands twisted and claw-like. Some were carried out on stretchers, their bodies lengthened grotesquely by inches. Others shuffled through the streets, bent and contorted, reminders that defiance left scars not only of memory but of bone and sinew. In societies where strength was survival, where labor meant food and protection, such injuries were more than physical wounds. They stripped men of livelihoods, women of their roles in households, soldiers of their ability to fight. The rack created outcasts, people crippled yet alive, forced to live as visible warnings. The permanence of the damage made them testimonies long after the torture ended. To see a man dragging his ruined leg or clutching a useless arm was to be reminded of the state's power more effectively than a corpse in a grave ever could. What made this permanence more chilling was its deliberateness. Torturers were not careless, but intentional. They calibrated pressure, ensuring that a limb tore but the victim did not expire. They mastered the art of pushing the human frame just beyond its natural limits, without tipping into fatal collapse. This precision was not an accident. It was the science of cruelty, and behind it lay the clear logic of deterrence. Better to cripple a body and send it back into the world as a living warning than to kill in silence. For the victims, the damage extended beyond muscles and bones. Chronic pain became their constant companion. Imagine medieval medicine offering no solace but crude splints and herbs. Infection festered in open wounds, joints healed crooked, scars formed across tendons. Some survivors lived in agony for years, their bodies reminders of the day when the rack had claimed their strength. Sleep was haunted by pain, movement became struggle, and life itself turned into an echo of the torture chamber. The permanence of these injuries also reshaped memory and fear. Communities saw what the rack did, and the fear was not of sudden execution but of lasting ruin. A man might face death bravely, but the prospect of living on, twisted and broken, filled even the boldest with dread. And so, the rack functioned not only in the moment of dislocation, but in the decades of suffering it imposed afterward. Its victims were not simply destroyed. They were remade into living monuments of pain. The rack's legacy, then, was not only the screams within the dungeon, but the silence that followed outside it. Men and women who once stood tall were reduced to bent, hobbling figures. They did not need to tell their stories. Their bodies told them with every movement. And those who saw them learned the lesson. The rack did not merely punish. It redefined what it meant to live with damage so deep, so permanent, that life itself became an extension of the torture. The rack is remembered as a device of physical torment, but its power reached far beyond the snapping of joints and the tearing of muscles. Long before the ropes were tightened, long before the crank was turned, the rack had already begun its work in the mind of the victim. The sight of it, the sound of it, even the whispered stories of its use carried a weight heavier than the frame itself. In many cases, the psychological devastation was what truly broke the prisoner, leaving scars on the mind as deep as those carved into the body. The chamber in which the rack sat was often dim and silent, except for the creak of ropes or the echo of screams from earlier torments. Prisoners were brought in not only to suffer, but to witness, to see another man stretched upon the device, his body pulled longer, his cries turning from words into animal howls, was to feel one's own spirit unravel. The imagination filled in horrors worse than any torturer's hand could provide. Fear magnified pain before it was even inflicted, and for many, anticipation was the sharpest blade. Interrogators understood this dynamic well. They would show the rack, describe its operation, and allow the prisoner time to contemplate it. Sometimes, the simple threat was enough. Records tell of men who confessed at the mere sight of the ropes being tightened, of women who broke down when the crank was turned only once. The human mind, when faced with the possibility of being torn apart slowly, often betrayed itself faster than the body did. And yet, for those who endured, the psychological torment did not end when the stretching began. The rack's genius lay in its gradualness. Each turn carried the victim further into pain, but left them alive, aware and conscious of how much worse it could become. Every pause between cranks was a silence filled with dread. Would the wheel turn again, or had the torment reached its end? This uncertainty was a cruelty in itself, as the mind oscillated between fragile hope and crushing despair. Witnesses outside the torture chamber were not immune. The screams of the rack traveled through stone walls, echoing down corridors, sometimes even drifting into streets where onlookers gathered. These cries were not ordinary. They were primal sounds of a body and soul breaking together, sounds that no imagination could invent. To hear them was to be marked by them. For communities, they served as a constant reminder that the state had tools not just to punish, but to shatter utterly. Even those released alive carried more than ruined bodies. They bore ruined minds. Survivors often spoke of nightmares, visions of the rack returning in sleep, jolting them awake in terror. Some lived with an unending dread, unable to look at ropes or hear the creak of wood without trembling. In a world without modern understanding of trauma, these survivors became isolated, haunted by an experience they could not explain, forced to relive the chamber in silence. Their madness was, in its own way, another victory for the rack's designers. What makes the psychological toll so devastating is that it multiplied itself. One man's screams became another man's warning. One broken survivor became the living testimony of terror for a community. Even those who never saw the rack in person believed in its power, for rumor and imagination filled in the gaps. The rack lived not only in dungeons but in stories, and those stories spread faster and farther than the device itself ever could. Its true strength was not only mechanical but mythical. By the time a prisoner was bound to the frame, the psychological battle was already half lost. Muscles clenched in fear, minds scrambled for escape, hearts beat with a desperation that left them exhausted even before the first crank. In this sense, the rack was more than a tool of pain. It was a stage. Its spectacle ensured that terror was broadcast to all who saw or heard, ensuring obedience without the need for mass executions. The rack's physical cruelty ended when bones snapped and muscles tore, but its psychological cruelty lingered indefinitely, surviving in memory and rumor, in the quiet dread that haunted households long after. It was not just a machine of wood and iron. It was a machine of fear, crafted to stretch the mind as cruelly as it stretched the body. The rack was not the creation of a lone sadist in some hidden dungeon. It was a device sanctioned, funded, and legitimized by the most powerful institutions of the medieval world, the state and the church. Its horror lay not only in the pain it inflicted, but in the cold authority that stood behind it. The rack was not crime. It was law, not blasphemy. It was orthodoxy. And that made it far more terrifying, for it revealed how cruelty could be systematized, polished, and wielded in the name of order. In medieval Europe, the church claimed to speak for God, and kings claimed to rule by divine right. Between them, power was absolute. The rack became one of their instruments for enforcing obedience. Heresy, rebellion, treason. These were not just private crimes, they were threats to the fabric of society itself. To question the Pope was to question heaven. To resist the king was to resist the order of the world. And so, to ensure compliance, the most brutal tools were not only permitted but sanctified. The Inquisition, in particular, elevated torture into an art of orthodoxy. When heretics were dragged before ecclesiastical courts, their fate was often sealed before the trial began. The rack, placed within monasteries or castles, was treated not as barbarism, but as a divine necessity. Priests presided over the process, blessing the chambers, recording the confessions. Here, cruelty was cloaked in holy language. To be stretched until one's body tore apart was framed as the soul's last chance at salvation. If confession was wrung from screams, it was taken as proof of guilt. Thus, theology and torture became partners. The state, too, relied upon the rack as an emblem of control. Kings and princes used it against traitors, spies, and rebels. Its public reputation carried weight. Word spread quickly of those who entered the chamber and emerged ruined, their bodies contorted, their spirits broken. The rack demonstrated not only that rulers could punish, but that they could prolong punishment in ways that were almost unimaginable. In courts of law, magistrates sometimes invoked the threat of it as readily as a judge today might threaten imprisonment. It was woven into the machinery of justice. What made this sanctioned cruelty especially chilling was its routine nature. Torture was recorded, cataloged, and filed away in legal records. It was administered not in secret but with bureaucratic procedure. Ropes and wheels were maintained like tools of governance, ready for use whenever required. In some places, specialized torturers were even salaried employees. Their craft passed down as though it were carpentry or smithing. The rack was not merely tolerated, it was professionalized. This institutionalization stripped away any possibility of mercy. A rogue torturer might hesitate, might be swayed by pity. But a system backed by law and faith demanded results. Confessions had to be secured, rebellions had to be crushed, souls had to be purified. The rack became an inevitability, not an exception. And the victims, no matter their rank or faith, could find no appeal beyond the very powers that authorized the device in the first place. The church's blessing made cruelty sacred, and the state's authority made it lawful together. They created an unassailable shield for those who turned the wheels. The victims' screams did not echo against injustice. They were absorbed into the order of things, dismissed as necessary noise. Neighbors, family members, and entire communities accepted the rack's presence, not as aberration but as part of life. Its horror was normalized, its violence legitimized, its place in the world unquestioned. The greatest cruelty, then, was not only in the device, but in the knowledge that it was unavoidable. To stand accused meant to face a machine sanctified by both altar and throne. To resist was to be branded enemy of God and King. And so, even before the ropes tightened, the weight of institutional power crushed the spirit. The rack was not simply wood and iron. It was a symbol of how authority could sanctify brutality, transform it into duty, and call it justice. The rack was more than a machine of wood, rope, and iron. It was a symbol, a visible declaration of power meant to crush not only the body of the accused, but the will of the entire community. Its purpose stretched far beyond the walls of the torture chamber. Every creak of its rollers, every scream that escaped its victims, carried a message. Authority could reach into the very flesh of its subjects, dismantling them piece by piece. It was not simply punishment, it was theater, a performance designed to instill fear and obedience in all who heard of it. The spectacle of the rack began even before it was used. In many courts, the device was displayed openly, its ropes neatly coiled, its frame polished and ready. To see it was to know what awaited those who defied church or crown. The very presence of the rack in a courtroom or castle dungeon reinforced the hierarchy. On one side, the rulers whose will was law. On the other, the subjects whose bodies could be stretched to enforce that will. The rack was not hidden. It was paraded as a reminder of what power could do. When the rack was employed, the performance became unmistakable. Victims were often dragged before witnesses, officials, guards, sometimes even ordinary citizens, who watched as the accused was bound and stretched. These audiences were not accidental. They were part of the process. To witness a man's defiance dissolve into screams was to learn the price of resistance. To see a proud rebel reduced to a trembling, broken figure was to absorb the lesson that no one, however brave, could withstand the authority of church or state. The torture itself was calculated to send a message. It was slow, methodical, and prolonged precisely so that fear could travel beyond the chamber. Confessions extracted on the rack were often read aloud, publicized, or used in trials to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Even silence became a kind of confession. If a victim's cries echoed through the walls, the community knew that the rack was working. Rumor carried the story further than any official proclamation, spreading tales of limbs pulled apart and bodies ruined. The rack was propaganda in its rawest form. Its symbolic power extended beyond the moment of torture. Survivors, if they were released, became living reminders of what the rack could do. A crippled arm, a twisted spine, a limp that never healed. These were marks of authority etched into human flesh. Such figures were paraded before communities without ever needing to speak. Their deformities told the story, resist, and you too will become a monument of suffering. In this way, the rack ensured that its influence outlived the session of torture itself. What made the rack uniquely effective as a symbol was that it attacked both the body and the spirit. Death could be defied. Martyrs went to the stakes singing hymns. But the rack denied that defiance by robbing its victims of dignity, turning courage into helpless screams. It demonstrated that power did not need to kill to control. It could instead linger, unmake, and cripple. That subtlety, the transformation of human strength into permanent weakness, was a more potent warning than execution alone could provide. In the wider context of medieval society, where rebellion simmered and heresy spread, the rack stood as a line of defense for fragile authority. It reminded people that questioning the established order was not a philosophical game, but a gamble with one's own body. Kings and bishops did not need to stretch every rebel or heretic. They only needed enough victims to etch the device into the imagination of the many. The rack's true reach was not measured in the number of limbs torn apart, but in the countless minds it subdued without ever touching them. Thus, the rack became more than a tool of interrogation. It was a political emblem, a religious warning, and a social weapon. It told subjects that their bodies belonged not to themselves, but to powers greater than them. It told communities that resistance was not heroic, but futile. And it told rulers that their authority could be maintained not only by loyalty or faith, but by fear carved into flesh. The rack's wood has long since rotted, its ropes fallen away, yet its legacy remains, not as an obscure artifact of medieval cruelty, but as a reminder of how institutions can turn pain into power, and how fear can govern more effectively than swords or armies. The rack was never just a device. It was a symbol, and its power endured long after the screams had faded.